The defendant, Brooke Richardson, murdered a baby that she didn't want and never intended to keep.
This case is about a rush to judgment.
She had a stillborn, and she made a poor choice after that.
Not telling anyone.
Not telling anyone and burying the baby.
You never expect the quietest streets to hold the darkest secrets, but that's exactly what happened in a small community where nothing ever seemed out of place. On one of those peaceful mornings, people woke up to a sea of police cars and officers swarming the Richardson family's yard. No one could believe what they were seeing.
Everyone wanted to know what was going on in our backyard and what had happened.
The sidewalk was lined with people sitting in lawn chairs.
Oh, you're serious, right? Out here?
Out here.
Police officers spent hours digging in Richardson's backyard. Neighbors watched from a distance, wondering what they could be searching for.
Breaking news here at Ohio: high school student and cheerleader arrested for murdering her newborn baby.
Investigators found her newborn baby's remains behind a house.
Investigators trying to figure out if that child was stillborn or born alive.
Nobody knows what's going on. Our family's scared to death. It just didn't make any sense.
Carlisle's a small town. You're not used to seeing crime scene tape up around a house.
And then, after what felt like an eternity, the officers emerged from the trees carrying something. A white bag. It was something far more chilling.
Are you scared?
I'm very scared. I mean, we were scared to death talking to you because we don't want things to come across wrong.
The remains they found, well, it appeared to be the body of a baby. Stillborn, they thought, buried months before.
How could that happen? I've seen her every day. I look at her, I talk to her, I hug her.
The officers carefully took the remains to the Miami Valley Regional Crime Lab for analysis, trying to piece together what really happened in that house.
Investigators were tipped off about the possible remains buried in the back of this house here behind.
But for everyone watching, it didn't matter what the lab would say. The sight of that white bag emerging from the backyard left a lasting impression. It was a somber, unsettling moment that no one saw coming, and it shattered the image of a quiet, perfect community in the blink of an eye.
Is there a way to describe this past year?
The worst nightmare. Purgatory. Every day.
Days earlier, Brooke Schuyler Richardson had been living a life that seemed pretty normal from the outside. She was young, just 20 years old, fresh out of high school, and headed towards what looked like a bright future. But beneath that surface, something much darker was stirring. That's what the prosecutor, Stephen Kippen, made clear when he addressed the jury in a tense courtroom, accusing Schuyler of something unimaginable. He said she had murdered a baby she didn't want and never intended to keep.
The Carlisle teen is charged with killing her newborn baby.
I can tell you that Brooke Schuyler Richardson did not kill her baby.
But her defense had a different story to tell. They painted a picture of a girl who had been through a terrible, private ordeal. They said the baby had already been stillborn and wasn't breathing or moving when Schuyler gave birth alone in her home. What happened next was what put her on trial: the burial in her parents' backyard, just days after her senior prom. Now it was up to 12 jurors, 7 women and 5 men, to decide if this was a crime or a tragedy. Now, before we move to the outcome of the case, let's take a step back to the time when she got pregnant. Well, she had actually suspected she was pregnant months before. That's why she made an appointment at Hilltop Obstetrics and Gynecology, supposedly just to get birth control pills. But when she met with Dr. William Andrew, her OBGYN, things took a turn she wasn't ready for. It was April 26, 2017. Dr. Andrew sat down with her and, after doing an ultrasound, told her she was about 32 weeks along. That's nearly 8 months. He told her she'd likely deliver the baby within just a few weeks. Now, you can imagine what must have been going through Schuyler's mind at that moment. She wasn't just a little pregnant. She was very close to becoming a mom. and this was something she hadn't told anyone. No friends, no family, no one. The way Dr. Andrew described it, she was in shock. She kept repeating the same thing over and over. I can't have this baby. I can't have this baby. She seemed terrified, like her whole world was crumbling right in front of her. And one thing was clear, she had no intention of telling anyone about her pregnancy.
I don't know when it hit me, but I was a grandmother and I never had any of the benefits of it. Our lives have been completely turned upside down.
What was the reaction to this story? How big did this become?
I felt like Super Bowl level.
The doctor, aware of how difficult it was for her to accept the situation, did what any caring doctor would. He showed her the baby's heartbeat on the ultrasound. Sometimes, seeing the heartbeat can help patients come to terms with the reality of their pregnancy. It's a way of making it more real, more tangible. But even that didn't seem to calm her down. The ultrasound didn't show anything wrong, no signs of complications, but Skylar remained as upset as before. At one point during the conversation, she told Dr. Andrew that she couldn't have a baby because she was supposed to be going to college in the fall. She felt as though her entire life plan had crumbled, leaving her unsure of how to cope. Dr. Andrew told her that being pregnant didn't mean she had to raise the baby. There were options, adoption for example. He tried to reassure her that she had choices, that it wasn't the end of the world. But Skylar didn't seem to find comfort in that. She was stuck on the fact that her future was in jeopardy. Before she left, Dr. Andrew told her something important. He said if she ever had thoughts about harming herself or the baby, she needed to call him right away. He emphasized that he would help her no matter what she did. However, Skylar never called him. After the appointment, Dr. Andrews' office tried to follow up. One of the staff members couldn't reach her, so Dr. Andrew personally tried calling her too. But he never heard back from her. It was like she just vanished. That phone call never came. From that point on, things only got more complicated. No one really knew what was going on inside Skylar's head as she faced the reality of her pregnancy on her own. What we do know is that at that time, she was a young woman with a secret that was about to come crashing down around her. And as the story unfolded, it became clear that this moment in Dr. Andrews' office would play a key part in everything that followed. So after all the details from Skylar's doctor came out, we started hearing from other voices. Lawyers and medical professionals began putting together what they thought happened in the days before and after the baby's death. Everyone seemed to have a piece of the puzzle, and as they shared their versions, a story of complicated relationships and sudden decisions unfolded. Let's take a step back to August 2016. Skylar had just begun seeing a guy named Trey Johnson. They dated for about a month, nothing too serious, but it was enough for their lives to change in a big way. Trey was 21 years old, and during that time, they hooked up twice. One of those times, they didn't use protection. Now, keep in mind, they were both young and probably didn't think too much about the consequences in that moment. Trey didn't know that night would come back to change his life. According to Trey, things cooled off by the end of August. On August 26th, just as he was getting ready to start his freshman year of college, Skylar decided to end things. She blocked him on social media, shut off all communication, and that was the end of it. Trey went off to college, and as far as he knew, the relationship was over for good. There were no more texts, no more phone calls, just silence. Now, the state later claimed that Trey was the father of Skylar's baby. He had no idea what was happening behind the scenes. Skylar had cut him off completely, and there was no reason for him to believe anything more had come from their brief relationship. He was busy starting his new life at college, unaware of the huge secrets Skylar was carrying. Trey's testimony shed light on how disconnected he had been from everything. It wasn't that he didn't care, but he simply had no idea what was happening. Skylar made sure of that. She had her reasons, and we may never fully understand what was going through her mind at the time. But Trey's absence from the rest of the story paints a picture of how isolated Skylar was during those months. She didn't lean on anyone for help, not her family, not her friends, and certainly not Trey. So after everything we've heard about Skylar's pregnancy, the story took another turn on her prom night. That was when things really started to get intense. You see, she went to prom with her boyfriend Brandon like nothing was wrong. However, something was going on. Skylar began to experience what she called super bad cramping. Now, instead of telling Brandon the truth, she said it was just her period. She was determined to keep her secret, even from the person closest to her. No one had a clue that Skylar was pregnant, not even Brandon, who was with her that night. She was tiny, barely showing at all. Her lawyer, Ritgers, made sure to point that out when they showed the jury 2 photos of her in that red prom dress. One picture was from February, and the other was taken on prom night. And even then, looking at those pictures, you wouldn't think she was about to give birth in a matter of days.
There's that image of her at prom, and she is pregnant there. And I swear, every time I look at that image, it haunts me because I'm thinking, there is a baby there that you cannot fully appreciate. No one could fully appreciate because she was masking it so well. Could she have bound herself so tightly that it compromised the baby's ability to grow appropriately?
So a little more than a week after the prom, on May 7th, 2017, Skylar gave birth. However, it wasn't at a hospital. She didn't call for help. She delivered the baby right there at her house, all by herself. Her parents, her brother, everyone was asleep, unaware of what was happening just down the hall. Skylar later admitted to authorities that the baby, whom she named Annabelle, was alive for a few minutes. She even said that she might have squeezed her too hard during those moments, but it wasn't clear whether that caused her death.
I hope I tried to feel on her chest. I didn't mean to push hard, I just felt.
During one of the interviews with investigators, a detective told Skylar that he didn't believe she had tried to kill the baby. That part of the conversation stood out because her lawyer argued it showed how the case was a rush to judgment. Her lawyer, Ritgers, also claimed that Skylar gave birth earlier than she had expected. The cramps she felt on prom night weren't just period pains. They were signs she was actually in labor. But Skylar didn't show that at the time. When she finally gave birth, she described the baby as pale, with no movement and no breath. The umbilical cord wasn't even attached.
I put her in my arms, I tried to hold her, and she's breathing. She doesn't have a heartbeat. She's not breathing.
How did you, I know the breathing part you can kind of tell and see. Did you ever hear a cry or a whimper?
Still, Skylar named her daughter Annabelle. And in a moment of panic, with no one to turn to, she took a small shovel and dug a shallow grave in her backyard. She buried Annabelle and placed a flower pot over the grave to mark the spot. Her lawyer made a point to emphasize that Skylar didn't just toss the baby away like trash. She didn't abandon her in a dumpster. She buried her daughter, marked the grave, and gave her a name. It was a small, private act in the middle of an incredibly tragic situation. After Skylar buried her baby in the backyard, an unusual event occurred the very next day. Instead of being consumed by guilt or sadness, she sent a text message to her mother, Kim. And the message? It was all about how happy she was that her belly was flat again. She wrote something like, "I'm literally speechless with how happy I am my belly is back. OMG, I am never, ever, ever letting it get like this again. You're about to see me look freaking better than ever."
Skylar's behavior after the birth of this child seems to be anything but normal. She starts going to the gym and working out, running on the treadmill, taking pictures of her stomach and sending text messages to her mom, showing her how she was losing weight and even talking about how she was going to get rid of that belly.
Certainly, that is not a statement one would anticipate hearing on the day following childbirth, is it? But for Skylar, her focus seemed to shift entirely onto her body. The prosecutor, Nippen, showed the jury this text during the trial, pointing out that she sent it just one day after burying her newborn. It was shocking for everyone to hear. But Skylar's defense attorney, Ritgers, had his own explanation for it. Ritgers said that Skylar's mom had always been very obsessive about her daughter's weight. They'd had conversations about her body and weight loss for years, and this was no different. He explained that Skylar had struggled with her weight going up and down for about 6 years. She'd been dealing with that constant pressure from her mom to stay thin. So when everything else in her life felt out of control, Skylar clung to the one thing she thought she could control, her body. Those text messages between Skylar and her mom about her weight, they weren't new. Ritgers said it had been happening for years, long before any of this came to light. Her family didn't know she was pregnant, so they had no idea what she'd just been through. To them, she was just the same Skylar, and her mom's encouragement about losing weight seemed like a normal conversation. Things took another turn on July 12, 2017, when Skylar went back to the doctor. This time, she saw Dr. Casey Boyce for a regular appointment. She was just there to get a refill on her birth control pills, but Boyce knew something was off. You see, Dr. Andrew, who had seen Skylar in April, had already told Boyce that Skylar was pregnant during her last visit. So when Skylar showed up like nothing had happened, Boyce asked her about it. And that's when it all came out. Skylar broke down in tears.
What do you do when you realize that she's not going to make it?
I have to bury her.
She admitted to Dr. Boyce that she had given birth to the baby at home, all by herself. She confessed to burying the baby in the backyard, telling Boyce that no one knew about it. Boyce was in complete shock. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "No one knows?" she asked, and Skylar just shook her head. That's when Boyce realized she was the first person Skylar had ever told. Skylar went on to explain that she had cleaned everything up, buried the baby, and kept it all a secret. She didn't want anyone to know. Boyce, of course, offered to do a physical exam, but Skylar declined. Boyce could see the toll this had taken on her and urged her to seek counseling, saying that giving birth alone and burying the baby was a traumatic event. Skylar, though, wasn't ready to face it. She asked Boyce not to tell anyone. But of course, Boyce couldn't keep something like this quiet. After the appointment, she spoke with Dr. Andrew, and together they decided to contact the police. They knew this wasn't something they could just let go of. Skylar had been carrying this secret for months, and now it was all about to come out. So after Skylar's confession at the doctor's office, it didn't take long for things to move forward. 2 days later, on July 14, 2017, investigators showed up at the Richardson home. They were looking for the remains of the baby Skylar had talked about. Among the team of investigators was Deputy Kelly McKay from the Warren County Sheriff's Office. She later described that day as one of the more somber moments in her career. Skylar, visibly shaken, led the authorities to the backyard. Her emotions were all over the place. She guided them to a small planter that sat in the yard. It didn't look like much, just some flowers and soil, but beneath it, they knew they'd find the answer to what really happened. McKay said that when they started moving the plants around, they didn't have to dig much at all. It was right there, just underneath the surface. They pulled out some of the plants, and right away, McKay noticed something. It was small but unmistakable, a bone sticking out from the dirt. At that moment, the reality of the situation became crystal clear. The baby had been buried in a shallow grave, so shallow that it only took brushing away some dirt and dust to uncover the remains. McKay explained that the investigators just basically dusted the area. They didn't have to dig deep at all. The grave was small and hastily covered, like Skylar hadn't planned much beyond hiding the baby. The scene wasn't like something you'd see in the movies, where it takes hours to uncover a body. No, this was different. The remains were right there, beneath just a thin layer of earth. It was heartbreaking to see. As the team worked, the weight of what they were doing sank in. They were handling the skeletal remains of a newborn, someone who had never even had a chance at life. They carefully collected what was left, treating the scene with as much care as they could. The discovery of the remains confirmed what Skylar had told her doctor. She had given birth at home and buried the baby without telling anyone. Following the discovery of the baby's remains in Skylar Richardson's backyard, the case proceeded to trial. It was September 3, 2019, and Skylar stood in a courtroom in Warren County, Ohio, facing some serious charges. The list was long: aggravated murder, involuntary manslaughter, gross abuse of a corpse, tampering with evidence, and child endangerment. She pleaded not guilty to all of them.
Court has been advised that we have a verdict. Are we ready for the jury? Yes, sir. Would the defendant please rise?
What's your biggest fear at this point?
Guilty conviction.
The prosecution argued that Skylar had not only buried her newborn, but also burned the body before doing so. This accusation shocked a lot of people. They claimed she had been searching online about how to get rid of a baby, which they said showed her intent. The picture they painted was of someone who had planned out the whole thing, trying to hide the evidence of her pregnancy and her baby. Skylar's defense team came with their own story. They said the interrogation Skylar went through had been too harsh and that she had been pushed into confessing things that weren't true. Her lawyer argued that she was a young, scared girl who had been through a traumatic experience. They didn't believe she had done anything with the intent to harm her child. During the trial, a psychologist took the stand for the defense. They diagnosed Skylar with something called dependent personality disorder. This disorder made her more likely to want to please others, especially in stressful situations, and could explain why she might have said things during the interrogation that weren't true. In other words, the defense argued that she had been so overwhelmed during questioning that she confessed to things she hadn't actually done. After the trial ended, Skylar didn't go to prison, but she didn't walk away completely free either. The authorities put her on probation, requiring her to stay out of trouble and regularly check in with them.
I firmly believe, Ms. Richardson, in fact, I know in my heart that if you would have made different decisions in this case, Annabelle would be here today. But I think that your choices before birth, during birth, and after show a grotesque disregard for life.
She started attending college and even worked part-time at the law firm that had represented her during the trial. Then, in 2020, something unexpected happened. Skylar's probation was cut short. Instead of serving the full term, she was released from probation nearly 2 years early. It was a big step toward rebuilding her life. In 2022, she moved on to put the past behind her. She won a bid to have her records sealed, which meant that the details of her case wouldn't be public anymore. It was a chance for her to close the door on a painful chapter of her life and try to move on. For her, it was the start of a new phase, one where she could try to live a more normal life, even though the events of that spring in 2017 would always be a part of her story.